Hello and welcome to all our viewers. My name is Ashwin Menon. I am the product head for business assurance here at Subex. Today you join us in one of an ongoing series of deep dives into the 2021 Digital Trust Survey, which covers revenue assurance, fraud management, and cybersecurity. In today's episode, we're going to deep dive into business assurance and revenue assurance. And for that, with me today, I have Priezkalns, Chief Executive at Risk and Assurance Group. Hello, Eric.
Thank you so much, Ashwin. Always a pleasure catching up with you, of course. Also, not only your sterling work at Subex and with RAG, but of course, all your great contributions to comms risk over the years. We always have so much to talk about. I don't know if we'll fit it all into the time available today, but let's have a go.
That was my primary concern. Just 20 minutes, you and me can spend a day speaking about this. I mean, this survey is brilliant in terms of the amount of data it provides, right? It gives a lot of good insights, but also raises many questions. And that's actually what I want to deep dive, hopefully within the next 20 minutes with you.
Absolutely. I mean, 185 respondents, a lot of data there, all available for everybody to interpret themselves. But I know that you and your colleagues of Subex have taken some interesting interpretation of data because it's in your interest as a vendor to work out where the market's going to go. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this enormous amount of leakage that we found in the survey together, but also some detail behind it.
Absolutely. The very first question, and it must be evident from the fact that this type survey covers revenue assurance, fraud management, and cybersecurity. So over the last 3 years, as a vendor, I can confirm there has been increasing asks to kind of talk about these three together, right? And that's why last year, even at Risk and Assurance Group, you guys expanded the remit from just revenue assurance and fraud management into cybersecurity this year. Do you think this is a telling trend of a unification of these three functions into perhaps a unified risk management team, probably under the chief risk officer vertical? What do you think?
That's what I would like to see. I don't know if we can say that it's, this is happening at this point in time. Certainly with smaller telcos, yes, that's happening because there's a more natural efficiency in pulling them together. Larger telcos, not so much. It's what I'd like to see. But I think also the reason we're doing it, the reason why you have to come them together is irrespective of how organizations divide the work amongst their staff. The reality is professionals are increasingly moving between these domains and they have to have hybrid skills that cover the domains. So somebody who maybe has a job title of security in one company, they have a job title relating to fraud in another. Somebody who has an RA title in one company has an RAFM title in another. Business assurance, when people have a business assurance job title, it can cover many of these things and increasingly does include things that would typically have previously been considered cybersecurity type work. So this is the direction of travel for everybody, irrespective of how you label these things.
Absolutely. And I think it's also time for telcos to perhaps take a leaf from the hyperscalers of the world, the Amazons, the Googles. They have a unified risk management approach which attempts to arrest risk at the point of inception, at the point of where that risk could potentially exist. So I would say it's more of a risk mitigation approach, which in my mind is so much more proactive. But it's interesting to see the industry moving towards this direction. And that actually brings me to the next question, right? This time you saw, yes, the overall numbers have increased in terms of leakage. Now, when I have presented the Risk and Assurance Group's survey to some of our customers, a natural response was that, well, yeah, because we are going through the 5G transformation right now. So there is a lot of the system is in flux. So that might explain some of the leakages. Also because traditionally system integration related issues have contributed to leakage. What's your take on that?
Well, it's always difficult for people to talk about what goes wrong in their business because we tend to be defensive and guarded about it. And as a result, nobody likes to say, yes, we've got the same old problems or old problems come back and recurred. At the same time, I think the data, when I look at it and the way I interpret the data from the survey, it doesn't give me the impression that the problem is that there are many more new leakages taking place, and that's driving it.
Right.
I think what we're seeing is a story that a lot of the old leakages are still not being addressed. Perhaps for the first time, some business assurance functions, revenue assurance functions are acknowledging that there's certain kinds of leakages that they previously didn't cover. It doesn't mean the leakage is new. It just means that there's awareness of it and that it needs to be addressed. So from what I've seen in data, I don't see a strong thread of 5G being the cause of additional leakage. But that in itself means if you're not dealing with all the leakages, you're not going to be ready to deal with 5G either. And if you look at components within the figure, say, for example, bad debt, which we include in the figure, this is generic. This cuts across all revenue streams anyway. So there is a lot of work that still needs to be done. And I would caution against functions saying, I only need to focus on the newest revenues, the newest technologies. Have you done everything already to cover the older revenue streams as well?
No, absolutely, right. I mean, and we have seen this from, I believe the first time it was highlighted was in 2020, that the coverage, the risk coverage for new, let's call it digital offerings back then, the coverage was quite low. The traditional areas of network and usage, provisioning, rating and billing, these always ranked right up there in terms of adequate coverage. But all the new areas, they were lagging for a couple of years. And it's easy to assume that now that we are in the 5G era, all the leakages are because of brand new issues. Well, the fact of the matter is most 5G implementations globally today are NSA, right? They're non-standalone. It's not really full-fledged 5G. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I want to pick up on what you just mentioned about bad debt. This year, if you see, bad debt was a big part of the leakage pie. And there was also a separate component called billing and collection errors. Do you think it's perhaps time to unify these two sectors into something like recovery effectiveness? And the reason why I'm specifically talking about this, sorry about that, Eric, just to finish the question, specifically, the reason why I'm talking about this is 5G was touted as, a boon for the enterprise side of business, right? And when I look at these numbers for bad debt and billing and collection errors, I'm thinking, is it perhaps time for revenue assurance and business assurance teams to pay as much attention to the enterprise side of business as they would to the retail side?
Absolutely. So this is why I want to jump in, because I like your idea so much. And I don't want to get hamstrung ever on labels, but the prospect of bringing together the data analysis that's being done by revenue assurance teams, by business assurance teams, and melding that in and bringing that together with the work that's being done to manage credit risk, to manage the work that's being done to bad debt. I think that's a powerful thing to do, and I dislike to see telcos having silos. Now, we know the reasons why in the real world these functions may be separate in a telco. And one of the big reasons is, of course, bad debt is universal across so many kinds of businesses. So when the telco is recruiting bad debt professionals, when they're staffing a team, when they're deciding what work needs to be done, this isn't telco specific work. Revenue assurance, on the other hand, a lot of the work is telco specific. It's not something that's easily generalized to other industries. So you have different kinds of professionals being brought in to do this kind of work. Nevertheless, the value gained by fully exploiting the data to fully understand your customer in a way that you may not have understood your customer previously. This is something that's very powerful for the telco. This is where new technology, the kind of technology Subex provides, is a great boon. And I want to see that the maximum value gained from it. And that means understanding your customers, whether it's a man in the street or whether we're talking about enterprise level, a lot more can be done. And we want to see the full utilization of those data assets, which does mean at least a cooperative attitude and a sharing of information, if not a full merger of teams.
Absolutely. I mean, when you were talking about the skills that go into the bad debt team and all, yes, it's just a generic function, but let's look at the value an RA team can actually provide, right? I mean, and that goes back to the proactive approach of some of the hyperscalers I alluded to in the beginning. Getting your RA team involved at a product ideation stage also puts into the risk register the fact that this product carries this kind of bad debt risk, right? So that at the realization stage of the product, after billing and all is done, it doesn't come as a surprise that, this particular product has so much outstanding debt and now we need to put effort into it. If it was already captured proactively that this product carries this risk, provisions could have been made. I think having RA team or a business assurance team involved at that stage would make such a difference.
Absolutely. I mean, and RA teams, some of them are resistant to the label data science, or they don't want to see themselves positioned that way. Some like to position themselves that way, and some actually go out and say, we're recruiting data scientists. Again, I don't want to get bogged down on labels, but I would entirely recommend that revenue assurance, business assurance functions utilize, build upon, sell within their company their skill at using data. And the advantage they have over what we might call a pure play data science function is they already know the business. They already know where the revenues come from, what generates the revenues. So it's not just data in abstract. It's data in the context of what makes the business a healthier business than it was the day before. So in that sense, I would entirely want to see revenue assurance functions, business assurance functions, taking on as much responsibility as possible for using the data, analyzing the data, identifying where more value can be generated from that data.
I completely agree. And there's proof of the pudding as well, a proof of what you're saying. Two areas that came in this time's leakage circle, stranded assets and margin. I can remember not so long ago where RA teams and BA teams used to face so much resistance if they even talked about bringing these areas under their remit, right? I mean, network teams and marketing teams are like the big bad boys in telecom. They were able to say, no, guys, we have it under control. You don't need to get involved. But now with RA teams having access to this plethora of end-to-end data, and I think the key word to use here is measured, healthy, and complete data. They are able to give real fascinating insights to the exec level, right? Now, I don't know if this is something isolated, but do you see this kind of shift happening where areas which were traditionally resisted within the organization now coming under the revenue assurance charter?
Yes, I mean, it's an evolution. You mentioned resistance, and I think there has been resistance to functions like revenue assurance functions expanding their scope and effectively pointing out inefficiencies, suboptimal performance in other parts of the companies. We can understand why other parts of companies may be guarded about that. What would seem to be implied criticism of how well they manage costs, for example, or whether they're generating profitable new lines of business as opposed to maybe loss-leading lines of business. So we can understand there's some resistance. It's also the case that revenue assurance teams, business assurance teams, they've got to be prepared to knock on the door and act like a salesman and say, hello, there are skills that we have. There is data that we have. We have the competence to do things that will deliver increased value for the business if we work with you, for example, to understand where the network assets are and whether they're fully utilized or not, where we can work with you to understand which customers are the most profitable customers, how do we encourage more of our customers to become more profitable customers, what's our strategy towards dealing with customers who are not profitable customers, who may be loss-making customers. These are areas where I also think we're seeing that revenue assurance and business assurance teams are now more willing to have an open mind, an expansive view, and basically knock on the door like a salesman. And if you get no as an answer first time, you get no as an answer second time, you don't get discouraged. You keep on knocking at the door because there is more value you can add to the business. So I think it's a bit of both. It's a bit of reduction in resistance, but it's also a success in internal sales. And partly that's because every time you have a success where a revenue assurance team, a business assurance team does do something beyond what seemed to be a limited scope, it breeds confidence. It breeds confidence to let them have more initiative to cover more areas, like, as you say, stranded assets.
And there again, we have data points from the survey that affirm what you just now said, because this year we saw that, executive sponsorship was not an issue, it's improved, which means that RA teams and business assurance teams are gaining, higher visibility in the organization. And execs are becoming more aware of the value that these teams can add to the organization. But that's the dichotomy of the whole thing, Eric, because when I talk to customers, when I listen to the telcos, it seems that the budgets don't grow as much as the visibility or the value they might have added to the organization. It seems to be kind of like a flat line, right? What do you think is the core reason for that?
Well, I mean, that's what the data does suggest. And then certainly the feedback from the survey did suggest that there's quite a bit of frustration that there isn't enough expenditure on technology, for example. So I appreciate and understand that. My impression of the industry and talking to executives around the industry as well is that it's not as if revenue assurance or business assurance is being picked upon for cutting costs, there is a general trend towards, traditional telephony products where revenues are in decline. And when you have revenues in decline, then there is going to be broad-based cost cutting across the business. And that means revenue assurance, business assurance, unless it's making a compelling case to buck the trend, will be on the wrong end of that cost cutting too. But that's where I say, make the compelling case to buck the trend. Show how a reduction in your costs isn't just about you doing the same things but with less resources. It's preventing you from doing new things that would add so much more value, where there's a clear cost benefit argument for doing those things, that now there's a reason to retain your budget and even to grow your budget, because in this tough environment where there's a temptation to cut costs, you don't want to be cutting the costs of the part of the business that effectively are protecting your profitability. So if we can focus on profitability rather than the top line, the revenues, yes, the revenues are coming down, but revenue assurance, and this is why the good reason it's becoming business assurance rather than revenue assurance. This is a good reason why we talk about margins rather than just revenues. If that functions being much more effective at holding on to and maybe even expanding your profits, even though the revenues are coming down, that's where the real value is. So again, knock on the door, have the initiative, put the proposition out there. Don't just react and say, we can do the same things, but it's going to be hard if the costs are low. Don't just be doing the same things. Look for new ways to add value too.
It's actually a perfect segue into another key finding in this survey, and it's surprising to me. 45% of the respondents did say that they did not feel that AI and ML was a significant technology that they need for the foreseeable future in the risk assurance and business assurance domain. And it boggles my mind because I don't just want to reduce it to AI, ML. I'm talking about new technologies, AI, ML, of course, robotic process automation. Now, all these technologies are adopted by let's go outside telco for a moment. Digital enterprises, specifically to solve the issue that the revenue assurance and business assurance teams are facing today. The deluge of data, the variety of business models that are being attempted, and the number of systems that they are being absolutely hammered with. These technologies were meant to enable operational teams do more with less, right? Not to say that you can't achieve those results without AI/ML, but the investment and the time spent is so much more. Now, in my mind, I have some thoughts about why these teams would feel that they don't need such technologies. It's a combination of multiple reasons. A, maybe they have not come to that point where they are deluded. Not deluded. Deluded is the wrong word. Where they are flooded with this inflow of data and systems and business models. Maybe they're not there yet. Or the focus of revenue assurance that gives them the highest return on investment is a more narrow scope, right? And there might be a variety of other reasons as well. I'd love to hear from you what you think.
Well, I think it's a very important point to identify. There's almost like this 50-50 split between the respondents to the survey that have either adopted machine learning or have a strong intention to adopt machine learning, and another 50% where you feel as though they may never adopt machine learning, or they just don't have it on their as something that they expect to be using in future. So there is a very strong kind of split there, division between the industry. Why is that taking place? Well, I think to some extent there are some people, it's a broad-based service. So some of the people responding to the survey, it's a case of walk before you run. And they're not going to have machine learning on their agenda if they know that there's more basic things that need to be done within the business before they do machine learning. But I think also when it comes to machine learning, and perhaps the hard thing about machine learning when you're making a sales pitch for it with inside a telco is it's about the machine learning things. It's about learning things you didn't know. So it can sometimes be hard to characterize where the benefit is going to be, or why you believe there's a benefit, what the value is going to be, because you're using the machine to exploit it. So it can sometimes be hard to generate that specific compelling argument for why you should invest in this technology. What is the specific benefit that's going to arise from it? So I would say the onus is on you, Ashwin, because you have more experience and visibility of these things, and your counterparts in the industry, to show the compelling business cases, the positive instances. Again, this is also a relatively new technology, and being relatively new, there's fewer examples of it being used in ways that generate positive value for telcos, not because it doesn't work, but because it's just newer, so there's fewer examples floating around. So if you're in a business and you haven't been told and you don't know of the reasons why it might be advantageous for your business, you're just less likely to come across examples, be told about them. So again, I think the onus is on you, Ashwin, to be in a position to leverage what you already know about the real instances where it's been used in practice to help people to frame, to characterize compelling business cases, so we don't get bogged down in the technology and talking about the technology and all the wonderful things technology can do, that we can relate it to the actual work we have to do. What am I going to tell my CFO? What am I going to tell my chief risk officer today about the value I might add if only I had this technology in place? And let's have some concrete examples to help people. And then when there's concrete examples, then people, I think, will be more positive. And even if they're not going to buy it this year, they'll know where it is on their roadmap for progression and evolution of the business. So I don't know if you've got any examples that come to mind straight away, Ashwin.
Oh, certainly. First of all, I'm taking that feedback that us vendors have a lot of work to do articulating the value in this area. So yes, I'm going to put that on my to-do list. But one example that comes up quite regularly is because customer experience is a pillar in the business assurance framework. And that is one of the best areas for the application of analytics. There's a concept called customer journey analytics or customer lifestyle analytics. Now, I don't want to get into the technical detail of it, but if I were to abstract it, what it does is it takes all your customers and divides them into positive journeys and negative journeys. Positive journeys are the kind that add value to the organization, specifically to your bottom line and high margin value. Negative journeys are your OPEX bottlenecks, or where your cost sinks keep happening, right? And I love the concept because think about it. It is abstracting the complexity of all the systems. It is abstracting the complexity of all the processes and the data and all of that, right? And allowing business assurance teams to really focus on what really matters to them. That, hey guys, this is the part of your customers who are feeling happy, who are feeling recognized, and they're adding positively to the business. And this is the subset of customers who are not being treated as well as they could have been treated, and therefore they are becoming, low margin customers or potential bad debtors, and so on and so forth. Now, in this example, you can achieve customer journey analytics using rules, but the sheer permutation combination and the variety of rules required means this turns into a multi-year project with a lot of investment in not just in terms of man hours, but in terms of the underlying stack you need to support it. Now, this is a use case which is rather simply achieved through AI and ML. So, but taking that cue from you, I am going to work on articulating this value a lot better, Eric. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great argument. That's great. I love that argument because it links it back to generating value by better understanding your customers in an area where we know revenue is in decline. So how do we generate more? So I think that's a really good, compelling illustration that you should be sharing with telcos more generally. Ashwin, I recommend that you use that one again.
Absolutely. And we are, I think, slightly over the 20 minutes time limit, but that's fine because
it's a fun conversation.
Yeah, and as some of our viewers who know us know, this conversation might go on for hours if we let it, but we're going to let you go for now. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. It's been brilliant. And for those of you who have not seen the other parts of this ongoing series, I recommend you give it a look. We are covering business assurance, fraud management, and cybersecurity for the very first time. And it's going to give you some brilliant insights and at least a few questions that might come up in your mind that you want to send to us, and we'll get that answered for you. Thank you, everyone.